Spinderella cut it up one time.
Come on, let's talk about sex, baby. But let's talk about you and me. Let's just talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about sex. But let's talk about sex.
Oh, yes.
Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about
sex today. All right, everybody. And listen, I understand that this is the beginning of a series called Pure Sex. And so as we get into this, I know that this could be just an uncomfortable topic for people to talk about in church. It's an uncomfortable topic to talk about, I don't know, outside of church or just in general. And so let's just take the air out of the room to begin with tonight. And here's what we're going to do, okay? I'm going to count to 3, and then we're just going to say sex, okay? All right? All together now. Ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, we're going to try again. All right, that's a little bit better. We're going to talk about sex. All right, here we go. So, all right, on the count of 3, we're going to try again. All right, 1, 2, 3. So much better, so much better, so much better, all right? Now listen, I know that on the heels of Easter, you need something to just kind of relax with, so we'll begin with this. And maybe you haven't experienced this in church before, but there's some churches that as the kids are getting ready to go to their boring church, that they come up and the pastor will do a little sermon. Has anybody ever seen this before? Anybody ever seen? Okay, so they bring the kids up to the pastor. So the story goes like this, that a pastor was bringing the kids up and he was doing a message for them before they go to church. And the key is that as you interact with the kids, you want them to ask questions and to answer your questions. And so he simply poses the questions to the kids and said, hey, what do you think the resurrection is? Little boy raises his hand and he says, well, I know that if you have a resurrection for more than 4 hours, you're supposed to call the doctor. Right? So, and then the whole place goes nuts in about 10 minutes it takes to kind of settle everybody back down. But now the air is let out of the room. We're good. We can move forward from this. But I know it's uncomfortable to talk about. But maybe it's because of the way you were brought up, that just was something awkward to talk about at home. I know for me, when my dad decided that it was time for the birds and the bees talk, it wasn't as smooth as like you see on Full House or like Leave It to Beaver or anything like that. Clearly, my mom must have prompted him and said, you need to do something here, right? So my dad, not being the most eloquent of speaker, he decided that he was going to VHS tape record a show off of PBS, off of Nova, that explained everything. And so when my brothers went to bed, he said, son, come on down. I got something I need to tell you about. So I was like, okay, right, so come down. He pops the tape in, doesn't say a word, just sits in his recliner, pushes play, and then sits back, and he does the funky thing with his toes that he used to do, right? That he just, we watched this whole thing, and as I'm going through, no stone left unturned, right? Everything was taken care of, we'll just say, right? We get to the end, and my eyes are as wide as the Grand Canyon, and he looks at me and says, you get it? It's like, yeah, I got it, man, that was crazy, right? And so the next day, my best friend Rob comes over and he walks in the door. First thing, I don't even say anything. I said, dude, you got to see this tape my dad just showed me last night. And we were run downstairs. My dad from upstairs, he's here, no! And he's running with his bad knees and everything, grabs the tape, rips it apart, and everything. But that's how I learned about the birds and the bees. So it's a bit awkward. And so maybe you can relate to that a little bit as far as this subject being just awkward. Maybe on the other side of it, though, you went to church that it was all about, no. Don't. We're not going to talk about that. That's just a dirty thing. We don't talk about that. Maybe you are in a marriage right now, and this is just a very sensitive subject for you. That this is hard news to even discuss because it's very painful. Maybe you're single, and this is another struggle on a completely different scope of things that you're wrestling with. But I also know that there are plenty of people out here that maybe even have wrestled with maybe an assault of some sort of sexual misconduct that was done to you. And those are some of the most painful scars that have ever been made. And I hope that there's some healing that can be done from that. I also know that there are people that are probably struggling with some pornography or some other issues as far as that is concerned, that those are a real struggle, not only in your personal life, but maybe in your family life. Maybe not now, but at some point I believe that it will, because those are very, very difficult things to kind of work through. But I do know that regardless of what you might have had an experience with this subject in the past, I do know that God wants to speak to you about it. And I know that because the Bible talks a great deal about the whole subject. The Bible talks so much about it. In fact, one whole book was almost completely devoted to it, the book of Song of Solomon. And the words are in there are very obvious and very, very heartfelt and very raw. And here's, for instance, this verse right here that says, eat, friends, drink, and abide deeply, O lovers. Now listen, you don't have to be real fluent in Hebrew to know that they're not talking about food right there. That they are talking about this deep, passionate idea of sex. And if that is what's in the Bible, clearly we don't have a God that is, no, don't talk about it, don't do anything about it. He is double thumbs up pro-sex when it comes to that. That is what God is all about. So why do we need to talk about it? I mean, why should we spend time with this weeks on end to talk about this subject? Well, for number one, if you haven't noticed that it's in our media everywhere. In fact, we all know that sex sells, right? We should know that sex sells. And only the biology people in the room get this right now. They're like, it's a C cells, not an S cell. See, right? So sex does sell. We also know that we see on TV all the time, that there are people that will train wreck their entire existence, their entire lives, their success they have in business, the success they have in the sporting world, wherever it might be, that they will train wreck those things because of this idea of sex and this drawing or having an extramarital affair or doing something that is outside of their marriage, whatever it might be. We see very, very intelligent people that quickly turn into Captain Hook from Jake and the Neverland Pirates, right? That kind of mentality, right, my boy, right? You know, like our mateys, or as my son says, our babies. He can't say mateys, so he says babies, right? But we've seen crazy things happen as a result of people pursuing this. We also know that it's a moneymaker. If you look at the pornography industry alone, we see that in 2012, the New York Times described that the pornography industry made more money than ABC, CBS, NBC, pro football, pro baseball, and pro basketball combined. My friends, that is $13 billion a year, or more than the gross national product of the country of Jordan alone. That's how much money. We also know that apparently the idea of being attractive and being desirable by the opposite sex is a big thing. We see it all the time. In fact, in 2011 or 2012, the American Society of Plastic Surgery reported that in the U.S. alone, $11 billion was spent on plastic surgery or cosmetic surgery of some kind. And I know that that's because there's some confidence things that we get from that, and also maybe through some disease or some sickness that it was required. I totally get that, but I also know that in most cases it's because we want to look attractive to the other person. And listen, my hand's in the air because I work out and try to take care of myself because I don't want my wife to have to bury me, and I also want her to think that I'm pretty cute in those jeans still, right? I still want that. That's part of why I do that. So I get it. But there are many voices in our culture today that will tell us that this is not that big of a deal, right? You don't make such a big deal about it. All this is physical attraction, and it's just a bunch of nerve endings and impulses. That's all. Don't elevate it to a place that it shouldn't be. Don't make it something that it's not. And I would say if that's the truth, then why is it that there is such deep-seated hurt and joy and these ups and downs and pain and all of these things that come along with this one act? Why is it that this act is so powerful and could create those things if it's not something we should worry about? Well, the truth is that we should know that God invented sex. It was his idea. It wasn't like someday he was like looking at the aardvark somewhere, seeing how they're doing, and then turn around and say, now, where did I put those humans? Now, where are they? Oh, me. Like, what are they doing now? Like, I turn around for 1 second, and this is what No, he made it. Right? It was like his idea, like the whole time. In fact, we see Jesus talks about it in Matthew 19. He says, the Creator made them male and female, and for this reason, a man will be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. One flesh. Now, that phrase is not just referring to the physical. In fact, Tim Keller would say that one flesh refers to the personal union of a man and a woman at all levels of their lives. You see, the Bible teaches us that the body does matter. And what we do with our bodies, we also do with our souls. See, God didn't create your soul and then just like bacon wrap you for the rest of your life, right? He created your body and then breathed life into you. He breathed life into you, the fact that what your body does and what affects your body, it also affects your soul as well too. We see it, that they are inextricably linked together. We'll say it this way, that sex is a soul thing. Sex is a soul thing. When you have sex, you're not only mixing bodily fluids and you're actually mixing souls. You're giving a piece of yourself to the other person, and when you give the piece of yourself, it marks both you and that person in that moment. So a dad was coming home one day, and even before we get to that, we realize that sex ed classes, we think that they teach them too much. I almost think that they teach them too little, that they're not telling them all of the right things. In fact, this dad came home from work one day, and he got to the end of the driveway and parked. He saw his little girl off in the distance, 6-year-old little girl named Brooke, and he gets out, and Brooke starts running to him and says, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," and he gets down on his knees, and he opens up his arms. I can just imagine Aniston coming to me and hugs her and asks her about her day, and she tells him, and then at some point she innocently looks up at him and says, "Daddy, what's sex?" And so all the blood like rushes completely out of his body in that moment. He has to kind of brace himself, and he thinks like, whew. all right, I knew at some point this topic was going to come up. I knew at some point we'd have to discuss it, but not at 6. And I mean, maybe I should get her mom. Maybe she would be better at this, but no. I'm the dad. I'm going to do this. So he builds up enough strength and he says, sweetheart, okay. And they walk and they sit down on the step and he says, honey, you wanted to know. And so I'm going to tell you. And he goes on and he starts to tell her about it. And he goes from Adam and Eve. He throws a couple Bible verses in there. He does a little biology lesson, feeling like he covered all the bases. And he looks down and he could see that her eyes got pretty wide at this point. And he says, sweetie, I know that's a lot to take in, a lot to comprehend. Do you have any questions about anything? And she slowly looks up at him and says, Daddy, I don't know anything about what you just talked about at all. Mommy told me to come out and ask you to tell you that dinner was going to be ready in a couple secs. So what is sex, right? So sex, you get it? Okay, all right, yeah. I think we're just teaching our kids the wrong things at sometimes. And a lot of that comes down to that we don't really give them the right message. Because when our bodies are one in that way, it's a picture of something very deep and spiritual. We know that God is what we call the Trinity, that is God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. 3 in their uniqueness, but 1 in community, 1 in their oneness together, in their connection to one another, that they can work together in the capacity of one. And God wants us to know this kind of oneness too. So he created us with this capacity. The writer of Genesis tells us, he said that so God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. So in other words, there's a very close connection to the fact that we are made in God's image and that we also are made both male and female. 2 completely different types of persons, 2 clearly different bodies, but with the capacity for oneness despite those differences. And so when God created the first man and he said that everything was good and nothing had tainted anything, he realized that everything was good except for one thing. He said one thing was not good. And he said it was not good for man to be alone. So what does he do? So what does God do? What does the designer do? He creates woman. He creates woman out of Adam's ribs. And his first comment, of course, was, hubba, right? No, it wasn't that at all, right? It was that you are now flesh of my flesh and bone of my bones, he says. And of course, it sounds like he's talking about her body, in which case the women are all saying, typical man, that's all he's thinking about all the time. And you probably are thinking the guy is like, hey, God, thanks for the hottie, you know? But that wasn't what he was doing. That wasn't it at all. In fact, the fact that he was attracted to her physical body was amazing, because he was saying, while we are different, I can see that there is a longing that I have for you, a longing for us to be one together. And that oneness is most deeply expressed through our bodies. And that's why it says, a man will be united to his wife, and the 2 shall become one flesh. It's a soul thing. Because the designer of pure sex says the longing of our bodies to be joined sexually, it's not just to ensure the survival of the species. And it's not just this body parts and nerve endings. It's not the shallow, often abused, demeaning, the misguided imagery that we give in movies and TV and on the internet. It's not that at all. In fact, the true root of that desire that we have to be physical with someone, it actually mirrors the desire of our soul. It's a desire for connectiveness. And it's a desire to release ourselves from aloneness. G.K. Chesterton says this. He says, every man who knocks on the door of a brothel is really looking for God. I believe that. There's a voice that's inside every single one of us that's saying we are made for connection, that we want to be loved. That voice, though, is not coming out of our sex drive. It's coming from our soul. And now, the interesting part, though, is that pure sex is not just a soul thing, because it's also a pleasure thing as well, too. It's by design. But a lot of people don't believe that. A lot of people think that God somehow is trying to hold back on them, and that by keeping them away, they're keeping them away from this amazing thing to spoil all their fun. And if that was true, then why would God have made sex a pleasurable activity? He could have done it anyway. You know, he could have made us like cross-pollinate like flowers somehow, or maybe like the snails that I was reading about, they like shoot these darts at each other, like that's whole part of the process. Or maybe he could have done it like if you sneezed on somebody, like achoo, like oh, congratulations, you're pregnant, you know? I think a lot more people would stay home from work if they had a cold, if that was the case, you know what I'm saying? But he didn't. He actually made this love-making pleasurable. He made this intimacy awesome. God says in Proverbs, he says that enjoy the wife you married. Don't ever quit taking delight in her body. Listen, there's some more words from Song of Solomon. And you got to understand, this book was actually not, the Jewish people were not able to read this book, Jewish boys, until they were about 30 years old. It was off limits. It was that much of an erotic book. And so what you're going to read was like some stuff that they couldn't even read till they're 30. So Solomon, verse 7, it says these words. It says, I belong to my lover, and his desire is from me. Come, my lover, let us go to the countryside. Let us go early to the vineyards to see if the vines have budded, if their blossoms have opened, and if the pomegranates are in bloom. There I will give you my love. You don't have to be an expert in poetry or know Shakespeare as your best friend to understand what that's all about. This is talking about a husband and wife on a romantic getaway that included sex. That's in the Bible. And so guys are nudging, the people you're with, like, we need to go by the bookstore and pick up a Bible, because this is like sounding really good. Like some good stuff in there. There's some good stuff in there. And when you read in it, you'll find that God is pro-pleasure. He is pro-closeness, pro-intimacy, pro-oneness with each other. And God is for you in this whole sex thing. And now, for us to enjoy this, though, this soul-filled, this soul thing, this idea of complete pleasure within the sexual field, we need to understand more about how God designed it to be. So we will have some visual aids, and you're wondering, why do you have Play-Doh? Well, this we will call our dude. There's our dude, okay? And this we will call our chica, right? This is our girl right here, okay? Now, let's just say, for instance, that red meets yellow, and they just kind of start seeing each other. He's like, hey, how you doing? Like, hey, what's up, right? And she's like, oh, okay. And then they decide we're going to go on a date. And she's like, oh, my goodness, it's tickets to stop. I love you so much. And you're going to pay $50 downtown, but you love me anyway, right? So they're so excited, and they start dating, and they're dating. And then all of a sudden, they decide to cross the lines, and they said that they want to kind of seal the deal, and their sexual intimacy comes into play. And as we've talked about, it's this idea that now they are more than just two colors, aren't they? They are actually intertwined, that they are almost inseparable, if you will. And see, that's the way that the designer created it to be, that it's this mingling of souls. And we don't have to believe this too much. Have to dig too far to understand that if the designer of pure sex is that way it really works, then two actually do become one flesh. It becomes this mingling of souls. And see, sex is a gratification to it that should be enjoyed, but within the right parameters. It has to be enjoyed within the context of one man and one woman who are committed to each other for the bond of marriage. That was God's design. And that's why the designer comes to us and says, listen, no matter how good it might feel or how attractive it might feel to do in the moment, I designed it to not just be about pleasure or emotional closeness, but about true oneness. In other words, he's saying, if you're not married to somebody, keep your hands off their soul. And I think I need to talk to my married friends for a second here. Because sex within your marriage should be something that you enjoy and you should do often, and that should be something that you should place as a high priority in your relationship. It shouldn't be the only thing, but it is an important thing. So, kind of like this.
Hey, it's Sunday morning. You want to have sex? Do ya?
Hey, come on, wake up. I want sex. Your hair looks good now.
Doug, I'm sleeping.
Did you feel that? Oh, no. Oh, honey. It's a dog queen! Oh, boy! Quick, under a door jam! Under a door jam! Find one!
Stop it!
Aftershocks!
You are so dead. You are so dead.
You want a piece of me? Come on, sex in the kitchen.
All right, so maybe not quite like that, but that would be some good birth control, I'll tell you what, right there, right? The sexual aspect of a relationship is highly important as married couples. It really is. In fact, the Apostle Paul actually talks about it in 1 Corinthians. These are his words. He says, do not deprive each other except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So what does that mean by mutual consent? Well, maybe it's after you've had a child, or maybe that you've got a house full of everybody's sick, or maybe sex has been elevated to a level in your relationship where it's almost greater than God, that you've created as an idol. And in that moment, God says that we want nothing greater than me. And so maybe it's time to regroup and figure out where it really belongs. But for a season, it says. But why would Satan care? Why would he want to tempt you in the bedroom? Why would he want to do that? What would be the point? Well, because Satan is not above throwing low blows in our relationship, especially when it comes to sex. Because when we deprive each other of sex or deprive your spouse of sex, it starts to play immense mental games with them. You know, they start to think that maybe I'm not pretty enough, or maybe I'm just not good enough, or maybe they love somebody else. And this whole thing just starts going crazy if we start depriving one another, and it's difficult. And the Song of Solomon would call them these little foxes that get into your relationship, and they devour and they wreak havoc in your relationships. And so many times the problems that we experience boil down to this lack of communication that we have. That we aren't talking about our sex life as a couple. We just don't talk about it. And we're setting ourselves up for a great deal of pain and heartache. John Eldridge would say this. He says that 9 times out of 10, troubles in the bedroom are flare-ups going on because there are troubles elsewhere in the marriage. You would be a fool to ignore them. So we need to take time to work through our sexual relationships as a couple. And I promise you that God will honor that effort. God will strengthen and make your relationship that much stronger. And this series is going to be fantastic. It'll be great. You'll learn a great deal about each other and yourself. But at some point, you as a couple have to sit down and discuss these things as husband and wife. Now, I also know that there are folks out there that are saying, listen, man, you keep your hands off my sex life, right? There's a bunch of people saying, wait a minute, you want me, you don't want me to have sex if I'm not married? Is that what you're saying? You say you want me to stop having sex if I'm currently having sex? What are you, crazy? What are you talking about, right? Keep your hands off my bone. Like this dog. This is exactly what you're thinking about right now, okay? So he's got his bone. He's doing fine, checking things out. And then all of a sudden, it starts to get real, right? Here it comes. Right? It's like, keep your hands off my bone, right? You can do it and talk about anything you want, Pastor. Talk about money, you can talk about anything, but I'll tell you what, I'm gonna bite your hand off if you start talking about this. And you get all freaked out and furious. And then some of you are thinking in your relationships, like, you know what? I'm just gonna take all the good parts and I'm gonna keep the sex stuff kind of going, but I'm gonna be a much better whatever. I'm gonna keep the God thing out. And boy, I would tell you, you're setting yourself up for failure on that. I'd also tell you this, that there's some people out there that maybe they're single and they want to marry a Christian guy or maybe marry a Christian girl, and they're thinking, man, I need some better pickup lines and I'm going to get some. So here are some that you should avoid, like, excuse me, I believe one of your ribs belongs to me. Or maybe, hey, what's your name and number? I'd like to add you to my prayer list. I don't know why I do this voice when I talk like this. But my favorite is, hey, you put the stud in Bible study, right? That's just weird. Don't do that. If you have somebody that tries to do it, you run, man. You run. You come tell me, I'll punch him. That's just dumb. But friend, we have to remember that the relationship, focus in on here, we need to remember that the relationship that we want, this pure relationship, this faithfulness you want for your relationship, and that we would all say that if God ever blessed us with kids, what we want for them, it starts before you have kids. The legacy that you are leaving for them starts before you even have a child. It begins now. And so you either are going to have a legacy that you are going to try to tell them about later and be proud of, or one that you're going to have to figure out if you're going to hide or not. See, we got to remember that what sex does, it unites two souls together. And so this idea that, well, it's not that big of a deal. Well, if we decide that we're going to not be together anymore and we try to tear it apart, we realize it's messy. It's painful. I mean, as much as I want this to be red and yellow again, it will always be mixed no matter what. And so now these two mixed things that have got things on them from other relationships then go into another relationship and add another color, and it's messy and it's hard. And those people that this doesn't matter to anymore just have deadened spiritual nerve endings, and that's just hard, and that's sad to hear about. But if you think that this is just some pastor spin, like I need to talk about that, listen, you can go and read some secular literature on it, some studies that have been done on it, and they will show you that the people that are most satisfied sexually in their relationships are married Christian couples. Man, you can read, University of Chicago, wherever you want to look, there will be plenty of, they'll talk about all the nitty-gritty that it involved with, and it always comes back to the best sex is married sex. It always happens that way. But we also should realize, again, this idea of Satan and why he would want to mess with us. Now, isn't it funny, though? Isn't it funny that you think of when you're dating with someone, it's almost the hardest thing to do to keep your hands off of them, right? It's like this draw that you want to be with them all the time, and you want to be intimate with them, and this draw that's always there. And then once you get married, it's like there's a wedge between you sometimes. That you're always tired, that you're always sick right before you go to bed, or you always got to work late at night. There's all these like weirdness when before you're like, wait a second, I couldn't keep my hands off you, and now I just want you to keep your hands off me. Like what is that? And you would be naive to think that it's just, oh, well, that just happens when you get married. No, that happens when Satan wants to tear you apart, because he knows that this idea of sex was created by God. And if something is created by God, then he wants it to go away. Satan's only job, the thing he wants more than anything, is for you to be destroyed. He wants you to be the lowest you can possibly be in your life. He wants you to be dead. He wants to kill you. And so he'll do any way that he can, including making us think that this is okay somehow. But if we believe that, if we believe that God wants us to be one flesh together, and we should wait until one man and one woman come together in the confines of marriage, then it really comes down to just what we want to do in our lives and whose voice we want to listen to. And I understand that this is a lot to comprehend, and sex and sexual feelings are struggles, but you need to know that's because we made it that way. It's not because God made it that way. We've complicated things. God is for us in every way, and God wants really good things for us. There's a man that was in the desert, and for 3 days he was wandering, and he didn't have any food or any water, and all of a sudden he looks up ahead of him, and he sees a shack up front, and he walks up to the shack, and he opens the door, and he notices that there's like a water pump that's inside. And on the water pump, there's a jug that sits on the top of it and has a note on it. And the note says that you should pour the water into prime the pump, and then as you pump, water will start to flow out, and you will have all the water that you need to drink. So in that moment, he wrestles with these two opinions. He wrestles with this idea of, well, if I pour the water into the pump and I start to pump and it doesn't work, I'm going to die. But if I drink the water now and satisfy my need right now, I might also die if this is true. And so as he hems and haws and he struggles with it, he decides that I'm gonna do it. And he pours the water into the top of the pump, and he starts to pump. He starts to pump, and nothing's coming out at first, and he starts to freak out and is getting really, really scared. But then all of a sudden, the water starts to flow. It starts to come out, and he's able to drink deep and refresh himself and wash himself and clean himself and fill up all the buckets that he had with him and all the jars that he had with him. And the note on the thing said that you had to refill the jar for the next person that came by. And so he did that, and he set it on top just like he found it. But he added to the note, he says, "Prime the pump. It works." See, each and every one of us has a choice. Each and every day of our lives, we have a choice. You see, it's not just about sex, but sex is a huge part of it, that each and every day we have a decision whether we want to have instant gratification or if we want to see what God has to say in his word about this eternal satisfaction, this idea of prolonged joy or prolonged happiness that he wants for us. And what the true heart of it is, the true root of this is one question. Do we believe God or not? Do we think God is a liar or not? If he's truthful, then what he says is true, that we will have this delayed gratification that will be better than we ever thought possible. That all of this effort that we place into holding ourselves back will be unleashed in the right parameters, in the right relationship, in the right context of marriage, that we will have that. And that even goes into other things as well too, as we follow God in our life, but in the context of our sexual relationship, that if we are willing to follow the directions that he gives us, that he will give us an abundant sexual relationship. Or we may think that he's just lying and that he's holding out on us. And the idea of instant gratification, regardless of what that might look like, is what we should do, because he's lying. He's trying to hold out on us. He's trying to keep something from us. You see, I don't believe that we want that idea that God is a liar to us, because we see the designer who loves us is for us. And he wants sexuality to bring joy and pleasure and intimacy and fulfillment to our lives. He tells us in 1 Corinthians that you are not your own. You were bought at a price. So glorify God in your body. What's he saying? He's saying, don't hold that part back from me, from following me. Give even that to me. if we can sum it up, it's this way, is that eternal satisfaction is better than instant gratification. That eternal satisfaction is greater than instant gratification. He says, submit all to me. And yes, it is going to be a lot to ask, but the one who asked for us all, that asked to give us it all, gave us their all. In Jesus, he held nothing back to his commitment to us. He held nothing back for his love for us. And he is the one who will help us as we hang on and we lean into his truth. We lean into the fact that he wants good for us, that he will give us eternal satisfaction if we can lean into his truth and his promise. Now, I understand that this message hits people at different points in their life, and you've heard all this, and some of you are wrestling with different things. Some of you are staying pure in your relationship, and you are encouraged by this. And I would say continue it. Keep going. Other people have experienced this tearing of your souls before, and you have got a multicolored past, and you're not sure what to do with it anymore, and you don't know where to go from here. And some of you are in the middle of a dating relationship and you've decided to cross those lines and you're wrestling with this thing of, now what do I do? Like, now what is God calling me to do? Some of you have been married for a while, and this again is a painful situation for you. To even discuss this is hard to comprehend, and you don't know where to start. How do I even start to communicate? What do I do with this? I've got things in my past or things that are going on. What do I do? Some of you are in great relationships, though, and your marriages are great, and you're encouraged by that, and I want you to continue to be encouraged. Some of you are hiding some secrets about the areas of pornography in your life that are wrecking not only your soul, but potentially your marriages, and you're like, what do I do with this? And what I would tell you is this, is that the same Jesus that held his arms wide and died for sinners, that killed people and murdered people and did horrendous things, is also the God that will meet you in your individual moment. He will encourage you as you seek purity. He'll encourage you as your marriage is strong, but he will also reach out his hand to you and offer grace when you look at your past or you look at where you've come or where you're at, and he will offer you to say, I will get you out of this. Believe me that this eternal satisfaction is true. And if you'll trust in me and lean in me, I can make it better. I'm not worried about your past. I want you to be focused on your future, of what I've got planned for you. So if we believe that, then we live differently. As we prepare for communion and we worship here in a few minutes, we do that differently because we ask God just to cleanse us and to wash us. And that as we prime the pump and the water starts to flow from his grace, that we just feel clean and we feel new and we feel refreshed because of him. And we walk out of these doors differently. We have our heads held high, knowing that God is in control and will take care of us. He does want good for us. But in order for us to do that, we must be honest of where we're at and confess that to him and realize that he can meet us and will meet us in those moments to offer us grace.